captain's most solemn oath is that he will give his life, even his entire crew, rather than violate the Prime Directive.
In the last few days, I've been enjoying a few videos that have been circulating around the Trek YouTube sphere. I'm specifically referring to the videos by Orange River and Trexpertise, well, the ones regarding the Prime Directive. After analyzing both of them in their entirety, I've come to one conclusion. They go way the hell off the rails. But let's look at their base claims without worrying about the random European and American bashing. They ask the question, is the Prime Directive an effective tool? And, well, is it racist? Starfleet Command General Order 1, otherwise known as the Prime Directive, is a principle of non-interference. It effectively says that the military arm of the Federation will not meddle in the affairs of other civilizations. Now that is a key point to remember before we continue. Ultimately, the Prime Directive was largely meant to protect all non-Federation peoples, regardless of their spacefaring status or not. The application actually sets degrees or limits on what can and can't be done based on the other civilization, where they are at technologically. Starfleet, according to General Order 1, is restricted from interfering in the affairs of all civilizations if it would lead to societal normative changes, whether it be the Klingon Empire or a pre-warp civilization. Interference can happen. It just depends on what the other power has going on. Also, there is a clause about interceding if they have oil. Apparently this was required by most of the northern hemisphere of the United Earth when the UFP was put together. Not sure about that, it's kind of weird, but anyway. Before I continue, veterans of the channel are going to note that I am about to use some examples that I, myself, have called stupid on the part of Starfleet. At least stupid in the way it's enforced. That's because they are very, very stupid. Don't get me wrong, the Prime Directive has a lot of problems. For instance, I have talked about the Bajoran Civil War with the Circle that was being funded by the Cardassians. The way Starfleet decided to use the Prime Directive here is nonsensical, but it is an example of how the Prime Directive is determined by degrees. When analyzing the Prime Directive in 2023 and considering all of the Trek works that are considered canon, it's interesting to me how I think my perspective has changed, at least somewhat. You see, from a policy standpoint, the directive is ingenious. The reason I say that is because it ultimately is a procedure for Starfleet captains that is vague enough to appease both conservative and liberal elements within the United Federation of Planets. Conservative warhawks would look at this policy and see it as a set of guidelines that could help dictate how to safeguard civilizations that can't defend themselves, while still setting boundaries with powers that could be a threat. For the liberal peaceniks, it's a standard, a code, by which to sit on a high horse and ensure the safety of civilizations everywhere, making sure that you are superior to them and still helping them out. Ultimately, the document is basically meant to cause as minimalistic harm as possible while still traversing the galaxy and going where no person has gone before. See, ultimately what we really need to look at is the question behind the question of the videos of Trexpertise and Orange River. Namely, is there a pragmatic use of the order, and is it helpful or harmful to the overall societal ills of non-Federation citizens? The problem becomes that the general order is interpreted depending on the time period and the captain. During the Wild West era of Star Trek, specifically the original series, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Enterprise, and Strange New Worlds, we see the non-interference rule as a law that will have you removed from command and put in prison if you're wrong to disobey it. It is something that can be broken, but must be done so with care, and that there is hell to pay if you do it in the wrong way. It doesn't remove the human element, if you'll forgive the species-centric idiom, from the process. A species may die if no intervention is done, and thus, intervention is probably required, especially if it's geological. But the same species that is in the midst of a civil war and destroying itself might not need to be intervened with. You might have to let what happens. Now this does open up some gray area, and I'm not saying that there isn't points for discussion here, but it's a more logical way of looking at the Prime Directive. This is not the case during the early to mid 24th century and is highlighted by the Next Generation and Voyager, especially in TNG, but we definitely see it in Voyager as well. The crews are from a time of the Golden Era, a time when the United Federation of Planets told its citizens that everything was great, that it was a time of exploration and there were only kittens and puppies everywhere. This saw the Prime Directive as some form of ethos or religion. We even see this little bit in early Deep Space Nine, which is ironic, but nonetheless, captains were willing to let entire species die because they thought the Prime Directive was God itself. You don't interfere because, The Prime Directive knows all. The last era, as of the writing of this video at least, is that of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Lower Decks, and Star Trek Picard. A post-Borg War, post-Dominion War era. A time when the Federation has received so many threats and has been near annihilation so many times that they don't even pretend that Starfleet isn't a military. It's a darker age where there's actual pain and hurting, and kittens, well, they don't exist. This Starfleet is militarized and cares more about the survival of its own people than that of the Prime Directive. Don't get me wrong, the Prime Directive is important. They do everything they can to protect others, but not at the expense of themselves. This is not how it was during the Next Generation and Voyager. So, we see three different interpretations of the wildly vague regulation. Is the Prime Directive a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it racist? Are we going to talk about the United States' justifications for the use of the atomic bomb? No, seriously. Trexpertise said that the Prime Directive is straight racist, and Orange River decided to say, without evidence, that the legitimate bombing of Japan during World War II was wrong.
YouTube Trek is fucking weird, bro!
The fact is that General Order 1 is not racist. Its requirements are set on a scale to give guidelines on how to deal with a different civilization. A matter-antimatter reactor, otherwise known as a warp drive, is an incredibly dangerous thing that can cause the destruction of an entire planet if you don't know how to use it. One warp drive can destroy an entire planet. Interacting and giving a society technology that would naturally come from the advancement after discovering warp drive is also incredibly irresponsible, and would likely also result in the destruction of the civilization. This has a basis of being true in the real world, but even if it didn't, it is true in the mythos of Star Trek. In Star Trek, this is proven time and time again. Now, you may want to say that the mythos is based on racism, and you'd be wrong, but it still fits within the universe of Trek. Additionally, any culture that obtains warp drive will quickly obtain other things, other technology, weapons like phasers, disruptors, photon torpedoes, and yes, even gelato machines. So once a civilization has obtained warp drive on their own, initiating first contact with them is vital to ensure that they don't become a Terran empire. Yeah. The Prime Directive is a form of control that we've seen ever since the Vulcans. A spade is a spade, let's not lie to ourselves on that, but it's not a bad form of control. It ensures that every species, every organization, and person can continue to exist in one form or another. Again, interfering and giving things like disruptors, phasers, even communicators can change a world in a way that would devastate that civilization. It's not being racist to take a look at your actions, and it is a choice to not give these things to other people, but sometimes it's the right choice. The problem is, as I've said, all of this is gray. We have to do it on a case-by-case basis. And ultimately, the focus of the topic for the Prime Directive from Orange River and Trexpertise was specifically focused on non-interference, and that's where I'm going to leave it as well. I've done a dozen videos on the Prime Directive, and I'm not convinced I have anything more to say, well, at least right now, on the topic. The Prime Directive is flawed, but the way it handles non-interference, more than not, when in the right era, is the best play. But these are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to follow, rate, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.